Texas Hill Country, August 1878. The first time Kade Trenton laid eyes on Odessa Sinclair, she was slipping out the back door of his supply store with a pouch of coins clenched in her hand and a knife strapped to her thigh. He had been up since dawn unloading crates of flour and coffee beans, and when he stepped into the back room, the door creaked just enough to catch her attention. She froze mid-step, a streak of sun catching the wild strands of dark auburn hair that had come loose from her braid. "You can put that back," Kade said, leveling his voice like he would with a jumpy colt. She didn't run. That surprised him. Instead, she turned slowly and met his eyes. Hers were green, sharp as cut glass, and full of something he couldn't name. "I will," she said, voice low and even. "But not because you told me to." She walked back in, dropped the pouch on the worn wooden counter, and left without a word. Kade stood there for a long moment, confused as hell. He asked around town that afternoon. Folks said she had shown up 3 weeks ago riding a half-starved Mustang with a shotgun strapped to her saddle and nothing else but a pack and a scar on her neck. She worked odd jobs, fixed fences, hauled water, kept to herself. No one knew where she came from, and no one asked. That night, Kade found himself sitting on the porch with a bottle of rye and too many thoughts. He had run the general store since his father died, took care of his younger sister Clara, and did his best to keep trouble out of their lives. Odessa Sinclair looked like trouble with boots on. He told himself to forget about her. But the next morning, Clara was gone. Kade found her scarf caught on the fence post near the road, and horse tracks, 3 of them leading north into the brush. He knew what that meant. Outlaws. The same gang that had passed through 2 days ago, asking too many questions. He saddled his horse, gun drawn, and rode out without breakfast. He found the first outlaw slumped against a tree, unconscious, blood crusted on his temple. The second was tied to a mesquite trunk, moaning through a gag. And the third, he was lying face down in the dirt with a knife buried in his shoulder. Clara was sitting nearby, shaken but whole. And standing over her, clothes torn and hands bloodied, was Odessa Sinclair. "You all right?" Kade called out. Clara shot up, running toward him. "I am now." He dismounted, heart pounding. "What the hell happened?" Odessa did not look at him. She wiped her knife clean on her trousers, voice hoarse. "They took her. I saw them riding out past the creek. I followed." "You followed 3 armed men into the brush?" he asked, stunned. "I have done worse," she said. He stared at her. "Why?" She finally looked at him then, eyes tired and unflinching. "Because no one did the same for my sister." Kade could not find words. His gut twisted with guilt. He had thought she was a thief, a drifter, dangerous. But today she had done what he hadn't even gotten the chance to do. She had saved Clara. Back in town, the sheriff took the outlaws into custody, and Clara refused to let go of Odessa's hand the entire time. Kade stood nearby, watching Odessa with the eyes of a man who had been wrong. Later that day, as the sun dropped low behind the hills, Kade walked up to the barn where Odessa was brushing down her horse. "You did not have to come," she said, not looking up. "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." She kept brushing, quiet. "I was wrong about you," Kade said. "Back at the store. You thought I was a thief," she finished flatly. He nodded. "I did." Odessa finally turned to face him. "I was. For a while." He blinked. "That's so. I took what I needed to stay alive. But I never took from children. And I never ran from a fight I could win." Kade stepped closer. "You won today." Odessa's voice dropped. "Not for my sister. But maybe for yours." There was a long silence between them. Then Kade said, "I owe you more than thanks." "No, you don't," she said. "Just take care of her." He reached out, gently touched the scrape on her arm. "Let me take care of you, too." She looked at him then, really looked. For a second, something passed between them, wary, tender, real. "I do not know how to let anyone do that," she admitted. Kade smiled, soft. "Then let me show you." She didn't pull away. That night, Kade fixed a warm supper and invited her to share it. Clara sat between them, talking too fast, too much, but Odessa listened. She laughed once, a short sound like she had forgotten how. Kade watched her across the table, the way her hands curled around the cup, the way her eyes flicked toward him when she thought he wasn't looking. After Clara went to bed, Odessa lingered on the porch. Kade joined her, handing her a blanket. "You planning to leave? Do you want me to?" He shook his head. "No. I want you to stay." She looked out toward the quiet street. "I could help around the store. If that is all right." "I would like that," he said. She turned to him. "You sure you trust me now?" "I trust you with my life," Kade said. "You already proved that." Odessa looked down, lips parting slightly. "That is dangerous talk." "No," he said, stepping closer. "That is honest talk." They stood like that under the stars, not touching but not apart. And something settled between them, something steady and just beginning. Odessa looked up at him, and for the first time, her eyes softened. "All right then," she whispered. And Kade knew he was already falling. 2 mornings later, Odessa stood behind the counter of Trenton Mercantile with sleeves rolled and a pencil tucked behind her ear. The ledger was open before her, neat columns of numbers and notations, some faded from years of sun and dust. She traced a line with her fingertip, calculating quietly. Kade leaned against the doorway, watching her work, arms crossed over his chest. "You don't miss much," he said. She didn't look up. "You don't write small." He chuckled once, then moved toward the shelves, restocking tins of lye and packets of tea. Odessa kept her eyes on the page, but her voice was low and steady when she asked, "Why do you sell thread for less than it costs you to bring in?" He paused. "Some folks can't pay more. Not if they want to mend clothes and feed their kids in the same week." She nodded once, no praise or judgment in it, just understanding. Outside, the afternoon heat baked the street into a haze. A wagon passed, the creak of its wheels slow and rhythmic. Clara sat on the porch steps, tying dried lavender into bundles, her hair pinned up against the heat. Odessa had shown her how earlier that day, neither saying much but comfortable in the quiet. When the bell above the door rang, Odessa didn't flinch, though her hand instinctively brushed the handle of the knife at her hip. An older woman entered, her white bonnet limp with sweat. She moved straight to the counter, setting down a worn list. "Odessa, isn't it?" the woman asked. "Yes, ma'am. I'd heard you were helping out here. My boy needs boots and my husband needs coffee more than he needs sleep. Think you can help me find both?" Odessa nodded and stepped out from behind the counter. Kade watched, silent, as she moved through the store with the woman, finding what she needed, answering her questions with gentle efficiency. She didn't smile, but her voice was softer than it had been that first day. When the woman left, she paused at the door. "Not many would have done what you did," she said. "You've earned more than a place behind a counter." Odessa only dipped her head, eyes unreadable. That evening, after they'd locked up, Odessa brought in the last of the crates from the porch while Kade swept the floor. The light was thick and gold, catching dust motes in the air. "I've been thinking," Kade said, setting the broom aside. "That land north of the creek, the parcel with the pecan trees. It's not much, but it's mine." She looked at him, brow drawn. "There's an old cabin on it. Needs work, but it's sturdy underneath. If you wanted space of your own, someplace to breathe." She didn't speak at first. Then, "Why would you give me that?" "I'm not giving it," he said. "I'm offering it. You've earned it 10 times over. And if you decide you want to stay longer than the week, longer than the month, I want you to have something that's yours." She stared at him, eyes shadowed against the light. "I've never had a roof without a lock on the inside," she said. "There's no lock on that door. But I can put one if it helps." "I'd rather know who's sleeping near it," she said, voice quiet. Kade stepped closer. "Then I'll stay close." She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't know what I've done. I know enough. And I don't scare easy." She looked away, jaw tight, but her shoulders eased. Later, when the sun had dipped past the ridge, Clara wandered out in bare feet and handed Odessa a small cloth bundle. "It's for your new place," she said. "I made it." Odessa opened it carefully. Inside was a small sachet of lavender and sage stitched into a swatch of muslin. "For good sleep," Clara said. "Mama used to say that." Odessa bent down, meeting Clara's eyes. "Thank you." Clara hugged her without asking. Odessa froze for a second, then let her arms wrap gently around the girl. Kade stood a few steps away, watching the way Odessa held his sister, the way her eyes closed just for a heartbeat, like she was remembering something she'd almost forgotten. When Clara went back inside, Odessa walked over to him, still holding the sachet. "Do you believe people can change?" she asked. "I believe people survive. And sometimes that makes them different than they were before." She nodded slowly, then handed him the sachet. "Keep it. For your house." He took it, confused. "I thought it was for yours." She met his gaze. "Maybe they'll be the same house someday." Something shifted in his chest, then not a jolt, but a quiet settling, like roots taking hold. He didn't answer. Just reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. The old cabin crouched beneath a tangle of pecan limbs, their leaves just beginning to bronze with the August heat. A faded horseshoe hung lopsided above the doorframe, rusted through in one spot. Odessa traced it with her thumb before stepping inside. The air was close with dry wood and dust, but the walls held firm and the floor didn't sag. She moved through the space slowly, her boots whispering across the planks. A single iron bed frame stood in the corner, the mattress thin and brittle with age. No curtains on the windows. No stove. Just silence and the faint smell of cedar from the beams overhead. Kade stood behind her, a canvas sack slung over one shoulder. "It's not much," he said, "but it's yours to shape." She turned, studying the set of his jaw, the quiet way he waited. "You always carry spare linens in a feed sack?" "Only when it's for something worth starting right," he said. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. He set the sack down and pulled out a folded quilt, worn but clean. Odessa reached for it, fingers brushing his. "It'll take time," she said, spreading the quilt across the mattress. "I'm not used to stillness." "Stillness ain't the same as being stuck," he said. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped between her knees. "Sometimes I wake thinking I'm back in that alley in Galveston. Cold and nowhere to go. I don't want that feeling to follow me here." "It won't," he said. "Not if you let this place become real." She looked around again, like she was trying to see it as more than four walls. "What made you stay here, after everything?" she asked. Kade leaned against the doorframe. "After Pop passed, I figured I'd leave. Thought about San Marcos, maybe even El Paso. But Clara was still little, and this town, hard as it can be, it remembers a man's name. That counts for something." Odessa traced a groove in the wood beside her. "I've never lived anywhere long enough to be remembered." "You will now," he said. She stood and walked past him, out into the fading light. He followed. They sat on the porch steps as the cicadas started up, the sun bleeding red across the sky. The air smelled of river mud and late summer mesquite. "You were married once," she said, not asking. He nodded. "Briefly. Sarah McTavish. We were both too young, thinking love'd make us kinder than we were. She left before the first frost." "She leave Clara too?" "She was never Clara's real ma. That was my stepmother, Lena. Lost her to fever." He glanced sideways. "You?" Odessa shook her head. "Closest I came was a cattleman with bad teeth and a worse temper. Thought I'd be grateful for a roof and a promise. I was 17 and too worn down to fight until I did." He didn't press. She didn't explain. A breeze stirred the leaves and a pair of mockingbirds darted past in the dusk. "You planning to keep riding fence and hauling freight?" he asked. "I was hoping you'd need someone who knows how to read a balance sheet and shoot straight." "I do," he said. "But I don't want you working just to pay off something you think you owe." "I'm not," she said. "I just don't know who I am if I'm not earning my keep." "Well," he said, "maybe you're someone who stays because she wants to." She let that sit a while. "I don't know how to want something that doesn't burn," she said. Kade reached over, slid his hand beside hers on the step. "Then we'll start with something steady." She didn't move away. Later, after the stars came out and the cool settled in, Odessa walked the edge of the cabin yard, listening to the frogs chirrup down by the creek. Kade built a fire in the pit and sat with his boots in the dirt, watching her silhouette against the trees. She circled back and sat beside him, knees drawn up, arms around her shins. He passed her a tin cup of coffee and she took it without a word. "You're different out here," he said. She held the cup close. "It's quiet enough I can hear my own thoughts." "That's not always been a comfort." "I could stay," he said, "if you wanted company." She looked over, light from the fire catching the edge of her face. "I don't want you to go." He nodded, and they sat that way, firelight painting long shadows behind them. No more words needed. Odessa leaned her shoulder into his. He didn't shift, didn't speak. Just let her rest there, steady against the growing dark. The September rains came late, but when they did, they soaked the hill country in silence. Odessa stood beneath the eaves of the cabin, sleeves rolled, watching the water bead along the edge of the porch and drip in steady rhythm to the dirt below. Her boots were muddy from walking fence that morning, the hem of her skirt damp from where it had caught on wet grass. Kade stepped outside with 2 tin mugs and handed her the warmer of the 2. "You're soaked. Not enough to mind," she said, taking the mug in both hands. He leaned one shoulder against the post and looked out past the tree line. "Creek's rising. Won't breach unless the wind turns. You always know where the wind's heading?" She gave a slight tilt of her head. "Only when I've had enough time to listen." Kade let a quiet settle in before asking, "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you'd taken another road?" Odessa didn't answer at first. She set her mug on the railing and crossed her arms. "I'd be dead," she said finally. "Or worse." He didn't ask what worse meant. She went on, "But if you're asking what I wanted before all of it, I used to watch the telegraph ladies in San Antonio. The way their fingers moved fast and sure and how they never had to raise their voices to be heard. I thought maybe one day I'd sit in a room like that, windows open, reading codes and knowing things before anyone else did. Why didn't you? Didn't have the right dress? Or the right name?" Kade looked at her then, not out of pity but something quieter. "You've got the right hands for it. Strong and careful." She glanced down at them, calloused and nicked. "They've done more breaking than building." "Still," he said, "they're yours." Odessa didn't speak again until the rain slowed. The light was changing, that golden stretch before dusk, and a cardinal landed on the porch rail, bright against the gray. "I used to be afraid of silence," she said. "Now I find myself hoping it sticks around." "You think that's what peace feels like?" Kade asked. She nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just not having to look over your shoulder anymore." He reached over, brushed a piece of wet hair from her cheek. "You don't have to look behind you here." She caught his wrist gently before he could pull away. "You sure about that?" "Sure as I've ever been." Her grip held for a second longer, then let go. "I want to plant onions by the back wall," she said. "And beans if the soil's not too rocky. There's good loam under that clay. My father had tomatoes back there once." "I don't need tomatoes," she said. "Just something that grows steady. I'll bring seeds from the store tomorrow." She stared out at the trees, then back at him. "I want to do it myself." "You will," he said. The next morning, Odessa was already digging when Kade arrived. Her coat hung from a nail on the cabin wall and her braid was tied off with twine. A shovel leaned against the stump and she was working the earth with a short-handled hoe, sleeves pushed past her elbows. He didn't call out, just walked to the edge of the patch and crouched beside her, opening a burlap sack. "Brought what you asked for," he said. "Plus some squash. Couldn't help myself." She took the seeds, brushing dirt from her palms. "You always give more than people ask?" "Only when I want them to stay." She looked up, eyes narrowed against the sun. "I'm not running." "I know." They planted in silence, side by side, rows marked with twigs and bits of string. Odessa moved methodically, pressing seed into soil, covering it with care. Kade watched the precise way she worked, nothing wasted, nothing rushed. "You remember what you said out by the fire," she said, not looking over. "Which part?" "That you'd stay close." "I meant it. I want to believe that." "You can." She leaned back on her heels, dirt under her nails. "Then stay tonight." His breath caught, not from surprise, but from the quiet certainty in her voice. "I don't mean for anything more," she added. "Just stay." "I will." That night, after Clara was asleep and the lantern burned low, Kade lay on the floor beside the bed, wrapped in a blanket, boots off, listening to the steady breath above him. Odessa had offered him the bed, but he'd declined. Not out of pride, but out of respect. She didn't speak until the room had gone still. "I used to think no one was coming for me," she said softly. Kade turned his head toward her voice. "I did." She was quiet a long time after that. Then, "I know." And in that silence, something unspoken settled between them, not a promise made in haste, but one shaped by every hour they'd already walked together. By mid-October, the squash vines had begun to twist stubbornly through the back garden, their thick stems sprawling over the turned earth. Odessa knelt in the chill damp soil, brushing away early frost from the leaves. Kade stood just beyond the fence, hammering a crooked board back into place where last week's wind had blown it loose. The sound of nails driving into wood echoed against the quiet that had settled since the weather turned cold. "You always work like winter's breathing down your neck," she said, not looking up. Kade set the hammer down and wiped his palms against his trousers. "It usually is this time of year." She straightened, brushing her hands on her skirt as she stepped through the open gate. "Clara's been asking after that tobacco tin of your father's. Said you promised to show her what's inside." "I did." He leaned one hip against the fence post. "I think it's time she saw it." Odessa tilted her head. "What's in it?" "Letters," he said. "From the war. And a few from my mother when she was still in Tennessee." She folded her arms. "You kept them all this time?" "I didn't read them until I was nearly 20. Pa never let on they mattered. But they did." She was quiet a moment. "You think Clara needs to know who they were?" "I think she already does. But it helps to hold something real in your hands." That evening, Odessa sat by the hearth while Clara turned the letters over one by one, lips moving slightly as she read. The fire popped, scenting the room with oak smoke and something sweet from the dried apples Odessa had pressed into the coals earlier. Kade sat across from her, watching the two of them without speaking. When Clara finally looked up, her eyes were shining. She wrote about the creek behind her house, about how it froze solid and she walked across it in boots too big for her feet. Odessa smiled, just a little. "Sounds like someone I know." Clara looked between them. "You'll tell me about your people someday too, won't you?" Odessa met her gaze. "When it's time." The girl nodded, satisfied, and carried the letters back to their tin, setting it carefully inside Kade's chest near the hearth. After she'd gone to bed, Kade brought out 2 mugs and poured the last of the cider. Odessa didn't reach for hers right away. "I've been carving something," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" She stood, crossed the room, and returned with a small piece of smooth cedar, shaped like a horse's head, the grain catching light in soft waves. The eyes were detailed, the curve of the neck careful and deliberate. "For Clara," she said. She said she wanted something to keep under her pillow. Kade turned it over in his palm. "You've got a good hand. I used to whittle to pass the hours, when I had nowhere to go." He set the carving down gently. "You got somewhere now." She looked at him. "I know." As the night deepened, they sat together near the fire, Odessa's knees drawn up beneath her, Kade's arm resting along the back of the bench. The air between them had taken on a quiet warmth, not born of heat but of time spent side by side without the need to name every feeling or question every silence. Odessa turned toward him. "I've been thinking about Clara's schooling." He nodded. "She's outgrowing what I can teach her. There's a parson's wife up near Blanco Lydia Booth. Taught girls to read and cipher before her husband passed. I met her once, years back. She might come down once a week if we ask." "You'd write her." "I already did." He blinked. "You didn't wait for me to say yes. She deserves more than what's at the back of the store." Her voice lowered. "You said you wanted her to have real things." Kade reached out and took her hand, the gesture quiet and full. "Thank you." They didn't speak more that night, but when she rose to bank the fire and he followed her into the bedroom, it was without hesitation. He lay down beside her not with urgency, but with the slow, certain rhythm of two people who had long since decided which direction they were walking. By early November, folks in town had stopped calling Odessa the woman who came out of nowhere. They called her Miss Sinclair now, and sometimes just Odessa, depending on whether she was ringing up soap or hauling sacks of cornmeal to wagons. When the preacher made his rounds on the third Sunday, Odessa stood beside Kade in the back of the chapel, Clara between them, her hand wrapped tight around Odessa's wrist. No one whispered. No one stared. They were just part of the town now. After the service, as the wind stirred dry leaves across the steps, Kade looked over at her, quiet. "I've got something," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. She frowned slightly, cautious. He pulled out a narrow gold ring, plain but strong, and held it out in his open palm. "I don't need a preacher's words to know what I feel. But I'd like you to have this." Odessa stared at it, then at him. You sure? I've never been more. She took the ring and held it between her fingers, then slid it on. It fit without effort. I never thought I'd wear anything like this, she said. I never thought anyone would fight for my sister the way you did, he said. But here we are. Clara tugged on Odessa's sleeve. Does this mean you're staying forever? Odessa crouched beside her. It means I'm family now. That night, they didn't light the fire right away. They stood on the porch as the stars came out, the wind sharp with distance and promise. Kade wrapped an arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, steady and unflinching. I think I could love this land, she said. You already do, he said. They stayed like that until the sky deepened into velvet and the last of the day was gone. Years passed as years do. The garden grew in wide, dependable rows. Clara outpaced the schoolbooks and eventually rode north to teach others. Odessa carved horses and birds and left them on fence posts for passing children. Kade built on 2 more rooms. They never spoke much about the past. They didn't need to. And each night, when the windows glowed soft and the porch creaked under familiar footsteps, Odessa would take his hand and Kade would bring hers to his chest, and in the hush that followed, they would both know they had found the life they'd fought for. One with no locks but plenty of doors. One where love came not in words but in every ordinary, hard-earned day.